I'm going to do a very quick introduction. If you don't know Dr. Peter Oliver, he is Associate Professor of Education in the ENHP. And he uses a lot of Blackboard tools, but he uses rubrics. And so I asked him if he would come please and share his knowledge about rubrics. I think they're a very important part of how to assess learning, and as we said, it'll help you with defending those grades when the students challenge you. So I'm going to turn this over to Peter at this point. Maybe you want to do quick introductions with the folks that are here, since it's a small group.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm Peter, and thank you for being here. Now, as Laurel and I began to prepare this presentation, we checked in about what are some assumptions we should make about existing knowledge. So the way we're doing this talk today is I'm going to do it as if you know very little, if anything, about rubrics. So that's how I was told to sort of think about it and present it. So with that in mind, I can move forward. And yes, Laurel, the piece about challenges in terms of grading work is something that a lot of us have to deal with when students contest grades and they don't quite know why they got a particular grade on an assignment. And in all of my years of teaching, over for 25 in fact here at the University of Hartford, I have learned how to deal with that, and rubrics have been a very important resource for me along that way. Okay. So to sort of jump in, and I want to invite you all to jump in too as we go forward with questions. Like Laurel says, it's fairly informal, hopefully informative. With a small group like this, we'll be able to maybe tailor a presentation a little bit too for your particular needs. Okay? And maybe even work a little bit together on something. So it's cold outside. It's been a rough patch of weather recently. Got me thinking about the weather. Weather? What does that have to do with rubrics? Let's find out. What are some dimensions or qualities of a day that I could begin to think about? Well, one comes to mind: the temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind, anything else. Now, along with these dimensions of a day, I could begin to think about, well, what would constitute in my mind a bad day around temperature, an okay day around temperature, a great day around temperature. So I could begin to think about assigning some kind of comment or word or description for each of these qualities or dimensions that I would consider to be bad, okay, and great. So this sort of mindset is what I'm asking you folks to begin to think about as we move forward into the world of rubrics. Because what you can ultimately do is create your own set of categories that you think are important in terms of whatever you're assessing, and then create some sort of evaluation of those dimensions or qualities. So then we move from the weather, okay, into thinking about, okay, well, what are these things called rubrics? Well, I like to think of them as a scoring tool that represents performance expectations for an assignment or a piece of work. And for what it's worth, this presentation today is in part thanks to this source down here below that I found on the internet as I was preparing this presentation. So most of what I'm talking about is coming from this source, okay? So a scoring tool that represents performance expectations. And rubrics can divide work into various sections, in the same way we were talking about the weather, temperature, humidity, etc. And each component can be assessed at varying levels of mastery, of ability perhaps, of performance, if you will. Okay. So for example, in terms of a writing assignment, I might be thinking about qualities like the creativity of this particular assignment. What are the actual requirements that were set forth in this assignment? What are the facts? How accurate are the facts that I'm putting forth in this assignment? How has my focus been on this assignment? And this is one of these rubrics that I found online when I was searching for something to bring you folks. So be thinking for a moment here about what it is that you would hope to be assessing. What kinds of assignments, presentations, etc. What kind of comes to your mind? Papers, Are they projects? Are they presentations? Artistic performances? Group projects? If you don't mind, let me sort of bring you in a little bit to the conversation. In what areas do you sense a need for a rubric? What kind of assignments, projects are you thinking about?
Papers and presentations.
So papers and presentations, and you're finding like you have an idea about what makes an okay paper, not okay paper, but finding ways to articulate that, especially when a student is sitting across from you, doesn't always feel.
That, and also I'd like them to have that information ahead of time, so they know where my mind is when I am going to grade the paper.
Absolutely. One of the things I have found incredibly useful is to post my rubrics online so that people can see them, so they know where I'm going in terms of how to grade. Very smart thing to do. So what are you thinking in terms of how you might apply them?
Papers.
Papers primarily. Okay. So this, I'll be thinking about that a lot in the chat, please.
I think one of the areas is assurance of learning, where we have to have somebody else look and assess your work, your students' work. So
For
that-
someone else looking at the work, you mean?
Yeah, the assurance of learning is an effort that's going through the whole university. It's part of the reaccreditation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to do is there's an assignment. It could be a paper, it could be a case, it could
Right.
be quantitative something. And I grade it and then give it to somebody else, another professor, to assess it using a
Right.
rubric.
Right.
And to the extent we can
Yeah,
clean
listen.
that up and make it as explicit as possible, it just makes it a lot easier.
Right.
It's a big part of reaccreditation, the university and for the various schools. So.
One of the things that's going to be really important, I believe, in the creation of rubrics is that I know from my own experience that I have more of a I call it like a buy-in. I buy more into this process to the extent that I'm creating my own rubrics and my own categories. This is what feels important to me, as opposed to having someone on the outside tell me this is what you need to be assessing. So I want to be aware of that distinction. And hopefully conversations can help you to sort out what's important, okay, in terms of the criteria. So that not only can you create or have some input in terms of the dimensions, also what constitutes good, fair, poor, etc. I think that's an important piece. Okay? And we'll talk more about defining our terms as we begin to move forward here. Okay? All right. Papers, projects, and I'll be thinking primarily about papers and projects as we move forward. Two types of rubrics that I have found to be very valuable. Formative and summative. A formative feedback is where I'm giving a student sort of like a progress note. This is how you're doing so far. If I were to grade this today, this is my sense about how you'd be scored right now. This allows the student and me to really understand ongoing efforts on the student's behalf. Maybe I learn in the course of my formative assessment, wow, I'm getting a lot of misuse of citations, poor use of citations. So as I move forward in the class, in the course, I say, folks, I've noticed as I read a lot of your work, there seems to be some need to beef up how you use sources. Just keep that in mind as you move forward. So that the student continues on with their project, knowing, okay, I need to work a little bit more on that. Sure, it's nice to be able to find that out on the way as you're working, instead of just suddenly having this grade handed to you when the student says, well, if I had known. Now you know. But of course, summative assessments at the end, the final product. Okay. So advantages I find, in some ways I'm sort of repeating a bit of what we're talking about, but this I think will be useful for us. I can begin to reflect the relative weight of objectives. I may want to communicate to my students, you know, it's important that you stay on topic and on theme, and I certainly want to weigh the importance of writing style. I may not weigh grammar and syntax and spelling the same way that I weigh how much you're staying on topic. So a rubric, however you define it and create it, you can actually give different dimensions a different amount of weight in your grading. I also find that rubrics reduce my grading time immensely because I'm reducing uncertainty and I'm allowing instructors to refer to rubric descriptions I'm allowing myself to refer to a description rather than actually having to sit there and write comments. You find yourself writing a lot of comments? Here, you find in a rubric, there it is. It's written right out for you. Lots of mistakes in writing. Please be careful. I also find rubrics to be very helpful if you have several people, instructors, teaching the same course. This way you can be on the same page. This might bear a lot in your comment about having to prepare rubrics that can demonstrate students learning across the college, perhaps. All right? I find that to be very, very helpful. For students, rubrics communicate specific requirements. I don't know if you're completely eliminating guesswork, but you're going a long way towards eliminating guesswork. They begin to minimize some of the gray areas. And they communicate requirements and acceptable performance standards. Okay? The students then can monitor and assess their own progress toward the goal, which brings to mind the formative assessments. And when assignments are scored and returned with rubrics, students can recognize the strengths and weaknesses of their work and then change accordingly. Again, a formative assessment. Again, more buy-in, I think, if you can create your own categories as opposed to having them imposed from outside. And then I think the next piece, which I believe is really critical as you begin to think about making rubrics or using rubrics, is you need to actually be able to define what you mean by excellent work, okay work, not okay work, in your own vernacular, your own language. Excellent, acceptable, marginal. Superior, tolerable, fail. You know, you need to come up with those terms for yourselves in ways that make sense to you. And this is where I think the heavy work needs to happen. Because once you get real clear about distinguishing between levels of performance, once you put all that effort into that end, when you actually start grading, it goes so much more quickly. But you have to spend that time in the beginning to get clear about the difference between a good, okay, and superior performance, okay? So again, back to an illustration. Laurel and I seem to think this might be important for us to take a peek at together, okay? Let's think here for a second. Okay, I'm looking at the dimension called requirements. Whoever this person was who created this rubric for this particular assignment, they were scored from a score of 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 4. And I'm assuming that a 1 would be the unfavorable outcome, 2, 3, and 4 being the highest level of performance. So looking at requirements, 1 would be many requirements were not met. Number 2 score would be, well, somewhat, most about 75% of requirements were met, but several were missing, several were not. A score of 3 would be almost all written requirements were met, and then 4 would be all written requirements were met. Okay, that's covering the spectrum of possibilities in terms of what someone produced, for sure. Accuracy of facts. Several factual errors in the story. Most facts presented, about 70%. A score of 3, almost all facts presented in the story are accurate. Score of 4, all facts presented in the story are accurate. So what would happen is, as you read or grade the assignment, the paper, you would give a score for each of these dimensions. Let's say, hypothetically, that the person, you decided, well, they did a fairly, give them a score of 3 for creativity. In terms of the requirements, yeah, they did everything they were supposed to do. Accuracy of facts, well, almost all the facts were accurate, a score of 3. And then focusing on the assigned topic, yeah, they did a really good job of that. 4, then 7, 10, they would have a score of 14 out of a possible what?
60.
Okay, out of a score of 16. So 14 out of 16 could be the score. Works along that sort of a way you could begin to think about scoring them. Okay? And then you would then need to make a decision about, would this score, would you want to use the percentages here as their score? Would you want to assign some label to what a 14 out of 16 would represent? Again, your choice. What illustration B shows, and then I'd like to talk a little bit with you about these. Illustration B shows what happens when you assign more weight to particular categories. Okay? Like in this particular assignment, the criteria are language and grammar. That's worth 10 out of 30 points. Connections and content were rated, were assessed at 15 out of 30 points. And whether the product, whether the paper was original, its originality, is only worth 5 out of 30 points. So the point here, folks, the idea is that you can weigh different components differently. They don't all have to be given the same weight. Okay? So maybe what would be probably worthwhile to spend some time looking at here would be, can you think about some dimensions that you think would be important in terms of a assignment? What are some criteria that you consider to be important in terms of a writing assignment? What are some things that you can begin to think about? Okay? We can play with that for a second. So maybe just spend a moment, and Lorella, if you want to chime in with something about where we're going with this so far, certainly, I'll encourage you in here.
I have a thought.
Yeah, jump in, please.
When I do a research assignment, people have to know how to direct quote, so that they don't end up putting this much of a direct quote in there, which is not saying anything. All they do is cut and paste something, and really haven't really said anything.
So what you would need to do is, my suggestion would be, what you might want to consider doing is, how would you label or categorize or name that dimension? Appropriate use of resource, appropriate citations.
Now, what I use is appropriate use of direct quotations.
Okay.
And then we have another one that says appropriate paraphrasing.
Okay, and that's important because you want to make sure that each of the dimensions that you're assessing, you're only assessing one dimension at a time.
Yeah.
That's an important piece. So use of quotations. I'm writing here quotations, and the other one was paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And how well they're paraphrasing.
So this is for like a written assignment that they have to do?
Okay. So you have to think of some way to define what would be unacceptable quotation use. Okay, and again, as many as you want levels of acceptance.
What are the unacceptables if they have too long of a quotation? Like half a page of quotation.
Well, you go.
Yeah.
So that could be again, I don't wish to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing you say is something like a score of 1 would be over 1 page of direct quotations, unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
A score of 2 would be as you define it, a half a page. A score of 3 would be a couple of sentences. A 4 would be 1 sentence. However you define it.
Well, a 4 would be an acceptable length plus also make sure you cite it. And so you say, I got this on page whatever of this, say to the page number.
Sure.
Yeah, I have found that I can combine some of those into
Right.
sort of one row, but I also found that was challenging, and that sometimes when I'm developing a rubric, I then go back and say, wait, let me look carefully at the and part, and make sure that it's not really a separate element altogether. I found that a particular challenge.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I was how granular do you get, and how do you combine things?
Right. Because I know I'm jumping back here a little bit, but I think this is relevant. If I was going to be going back to my weather example, I wouldn't want to have one of my dimensions be temperature and humidity. Well, it was cold, warm, and warm, but it was also humid. It was cold but dry. It was a cold but humid. Those are separate criteria, separate dimensions. So you want to make sure that all of your dimensions here are distinct enough so you can write about them. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
That's
we
an
have a
important
separate
piece.
dimension that says, did they cite correctly?
There you
So
go.
if they did the page number thing, that would be under there, but too long a quotation would be under
Sure.
another one.
So again, back to Laurel's point, you just want to make sure you collapse these dimensions when you can, but if you can find ways to really articulate the difference between a score of 1, 2, and 3, so it's clearly only this dimension and then only this dimension, yes. Then it becomes cleaner and less room for conflict and issues. Okay? Do you have any thoughts about dimensions you might be thinking about as you move forward with a writing assignment?
Yeah, I'm looking at, giving a small essay to be written on the subject matter.
Sure.
Thinking how I'm going to dimensionalize it. And I know in my mind how I'm going to, when I read it, how I'm going to grade it.
Well,
And
what?
I got to verbalize it. And the other part that I'm struggling, I'm sure you will go over it, how do I communicate that to the students? This is how you're going to be graded.
Okay. I think what makes an example like this useful, okay, is, let's see if I can find illustration B here for a second. This would make sense to a person who created it, right? So hopefully this was their idea about what constitutes a good paper. It would be challenging for me to sit with someone if I just borrowed this rubric, because I would not know how to communicate this to a student. So when you mentioned before that you sit there and you say, well, I'm thinking about what makes a good paper in my mind. Those are the words you want to write down so that you can then begin to create those dimensions. Because once you get clear about the dimensions in your own mind and feel good about that, it's so much easier to communicate that to a student. But having said that, if I had written this and felt comfortable with these dimensions and wanted to use them, I would say to a student, well, there are 3 basic things that I use to grade your work. How well you use language and grammar. I mean, I would literally talk in those terms. So we're really clear, this or these are the dimensions I'm referring to. Language and grammar, how much connection and content was there, and how original did this piece of work, how original was this piece of work. And then I would articulate, these are my scores across these different dimensions. Okay? Language and, for example, language and grammar. So many errors. Lack of evidence of editing or review. A score of 2. Serious errors that inhibit understanding. Not quite sure of the difference there. Level 3. Errors remain that require further attention. Well, that's different than a score of 1. I see that. A level 4 score. Fewer errors, clear evidence of editing, boom. And a score of 5. Occasional or minor errors. So as you think about your own writing piece, what you might use, would this be something that's important for you when you're writing?
Depends upon the students. In my classes, a lot of them are foreign students.
Okay.
Okay? And they struggle trying to write a sentence even.
Yes.
And when I'm reading it, I know they know the subject matter, but they have difficulty writing it.
Right.
How do you grade those kind of things?
Okay. So I'm reading a paper written by a student whose first language might not be English. Okay. So I could begin to think about what are some criteria in my mind. Well, it's funny, the word effort comes to mind, although I'm not sure how to articulate the word effort. The sense of, am I trying? Does that seem to be something that comes to your mind as you grade, that you know that they're persistent?
It does.
Okay.
Yes.
So you could write down the word, you could write for yourself, to begin the conversation, the word effort. You might combine that with the word persistence, like they keep trying. That might be a separate category for you, or it might be the same category for you, depending on how you define effort and persistence. So let's work with this for just a moment, okay? We can play a little bit with that. Do you want to think of them as the same, or would you like for this conversation to think of them as separate, as different categories, as you're grading?
That would be 2 different categories.
Okay. So let's think of a score of 1 being unacceptable, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 4 being excellent. All right? You got the idea? what in your mind would you consider to be unacceptable effort? What does it look like, sound like, feel like if someone does unacceptable effort? What would that look like? They don't
It's
submit
kind
the
of
work?
hard to say. Let me give you a simple example.
Yeah, sure.
I have some students, okay, they write differently than we do right here. The sentence starting is different. Over a period of time, I understand what they're doing. What we would start a sentence here with, that would be in the middle, and the other part is in the middle actually. So when I'm reading it, now I'm used to it.
Right.
I can see they know the subject matter or not.
Okay, okay.
They just can't express it in English. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to, come to this class, basically figure out how I'm going to do that. How can use rubrics in helping me in grading those papers?
Oh, well, sort of my sense of the presentation is I'm showing you what rubrics are and what they can look like and how they can be used. The challenge for you, and I'll be certainly happy to try to be helpful with this, that's a smaller piece of what I'm thinking about
Yeah.
today, is
But
actually filling in the squares.
See, the other thing
Depends
is,
on what you're doing.
the same assignment is given to the students from this country or even other country who speak good English. They're
Yeah.
fine. Only a few of them.
All right.
And I had to pick some of them and grade them
Differently. So there's the challenge. I mean, you want to balance individual differences and uniqueness with equity and fairness.
Yeah.
And that's something you have to kind of wrestle with and think about. And I don't have I wish I could refer you to page 84 of the book.
Right.
But you know what I mean? There's the challenge and there's
Yeah,
the
it is a
work.
challenge.
Now, do you have colleagues with whom you work, with whom you wrestle with these issues?
I've talked to some of the colleagues about that.
Because that could be a place to bring
Yeah.
further the conversation. Not to jump away from the topic, because I agree with you, it's a very important subject. But I'm thinking colleagues with whom you wrestle with these issues on a regular basis might have more ideas and suggestions about dimensions, acceptable dimensions across the board, and criteria for different levels of performance.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, please.
In some of the professional exams, if there's an essay, what they require in the dimensions are key concepts. So there's key concepts that you want them to portray that are independent of grammar or sentence structure.
Right.
And so if there are 5 key constructs, then if they get none of them, it's unacceptable. If they get 2 of, that type of thing. So if you specify the key concepts, independent of grammar and sentence structure, that might be the way to do it.
Just to give you an example, one of the assignments, which is my favorite one, I give to almost every class I teach in a different form,
Mhm.
is I teach information technology mostly, some management. But in information technology, I ask them, every class I ask them, what's it going to look like 5 years from now? There's no set rules, there's no nothing. You got to figure out, you got to do the research. I tell them where are some of the companies you should be looking into, what they're doing, things like that. And the answers are different. And I'm saying, okay, can I use this thing here for grading those kind of papers?
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I hear some criteria right there, because you're referring them to some companies, so.
Well, they don't have to use the company,
Yeah.
that's only for research matter.
Right, but you can.
But I don't want them to, see, the other thing I look at is, are they talking about the things that already are here? I don't want them to talk about it. I want them to talk about the future.
So originality.
Yeah.
Again, is that the term that makes sense to you?
Yeah, originality.
So
makes sense.
originality. So that could be another piece of the assessment. That could be one of your dimensions. How original. Shows very little evidence of forward thinking. And you'd have to define these terms if they have questions about them. Little evidence of thinking. Some. Frequent. See, you can create it that way.
To give you a simple example in that, most of the students write about cell phone. Okay, what's going to look like in the future. But a lot of them write what it is already here. I don't want to think like that. I want to think 5 years in the future.
There you go.
And, then the only way I can, in my mind even now, I don't know if I can use this, but maybe if I try it, I'll improve upon it over a period of time, and it'll become better.
You know, another idea, that sounds fantastic, because you're going to try it out as an experiment. But all of this feels like an experiment.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing experiment. I have found it useful in the construction of my rubrics. I have conversations with my students, and I show them my rubric. And I get feedback from them about, does this make sense, and how are they interpreting this? They may not understand some of the dimensions. So if I can really get some clarity from my students about what these terms mean, I can rethink perhaps what it is I'm trying to say, rewrite it so that the student can go, I understand what that is now. And I include that forward from that point on. So students can be a great resource.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the things that I do, and I have to confess first, that the particular discipline that I teach is about a very, what we call mastery learning. In other words, the goal is that everyone gets an A. They mastered the content. And so what I do is I use rubrics. They're in my syllabus, all the projects, summer papers, you know, research. But I tell the students, if you're not satisfied, do it again. Go back, work it again. I think I learned this in Indiana University, my undergraduate days, with a poetry class. And I learned so much from that style, where I would write a paper about a poem, and this was a very distinguished professor there, and he would say, you know, you're not digging deep enough. Go back. Try again. And then by the second time, I would have really gotten over the superficial kind of looking at the poetry and been really digging deep. And I learned that lesson, and I incorporate that into my. Now, you have to check if the department is okay with that. I don't know what policies or guidelines we might have, but in my particular field, that is what it is, because it's really about mastery of learning. You know, it's used by doctors, etc. You can't have a C doctor. I mean, they have to get to the A level. I'm sure in your field that's probably the same way. They have to be an A person, or they're dead people. Or the military is mastery learning when they do their soldier training, because otherwise you have dead people.
Right. You know, interesting in your words there, Lorelle, I'm thinking, when I hear the term, you didn't dig deeply enough, I think to myself, please, sir, ma'am, what does that mean to dig deeply? Can you define digging deeply in terms of a behavior and outcome? If I can get clear about those terms, now I know how to go about and write this paper. Otherwise, I'm left with, I don't know what this means. You know? And that's where you might run into hassles when you grade students' work, when you say, well, it's just not quite there. What does that mean? Show me in concrete terms, hence the dimensionality. Okay. So is this helpful in some ways?
Yeah.
Gives you something, at least a step in the right direction.
Right.
Right. What are you thinking about the criteria as you think about?
I'm thinking, I moved from papers to presentation.
Okay.
Because that's what they struggle with, and to be able to stand in front of a group, present their paper,
Right.
their position, their opinion, and do it in such a way that is professional.
Okay.
So
I'm going to, as you write, I'm writing down key words. I'm
so
writing down the word professionalism. Yeah.
their ability to appear or to seem comfortable with their material.
So a level of comfort or familiarity comes to my mind. Comfort or familiarity with material.
Yeah,
I'll just write FAM, period.
that's fine.
Professionalism, comfortable, familiarity, yeah.
Then there's a couple of other things, the excessive body movements.
Body language?
Well,
Body
I was
language.
thinking of it, in my last class, she was constantly running her fingers through her hair. You know, there was another one who was putting her eyeglasses on and off and on and off. Clearly a nervous habit, both of them. And how do you, I don't know how to get to that without, and doing it in such a way that's going to be helpful, they understand, they don't feel badly about the feedback. And
So I'm writing a question mark, and I'm thinking you need to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Body language, habits.
Yeah, I wrote down body language, and so for instance, level 1 would be repetitive movements.
So I could write down, you know, hearing your words as I'm understanding you, body language, okay?
Mhm.
And what I could imagine, perhaps as a 1 would be something like just many distractive actions.
Yeah, that's correct.
See
Because
me?
you don't even hear them anymore, you're just focused on that action, that repetitive action, so yes, it's very distracting
So-
to the audience.
So, multiple distractive behaviors,
Mhm.
and in parentheses, however, again, how you define that.
Right.
You mentioned hair, playing, glasses, what have you. And then what would be considered, at another level?
Well, like, for me, the body language, good eye contact, so that would be before, good eye contact with the audience,
Okay.
I'm not sure, the reading, just standing there and reading the slides, I'm not quite sure where that would
So
fall. That would-
engaging the audience is
Engaging,
one.
Yes.
So now, this is what I was referring to earlier right here about body language and eye contact. I could have a separate dimension that would say eye contact, no eye contact, occasional eye contact, frequent eye contact. Body language, no distraction. In other words, for example, if these are combined into one category, I'm looking at you, right? And I'm doing this nonstop, but I'm always looking at you. So how do I score you? And yet, I'm not even going to look at you now, but I'm going to also not touch my hair or my glasses. So I scored really well on one.
Yes, I'm a distracted figure.
You've got to, again, what an opportunity to get clear about what are my dimensions, and are they distinct and separate enough? And I'm only assessing one dimension at a time.
And what I like about that, when I see this written, is that you're essentially, we talked in our description of this, a blueprint. Because just them reading the rubric, if you share it with them beforehand, tells them this is what it means to do a good presentation. I need to watch that I'm not fidgeting, and that would be very helpful to them
Yeah,
up front.
Absolutely it would.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what I'm thinking and what I find to be good, bad, or indifferent. And so being able to give them something like this ahead of time.
And when I see familiar, I think practice, because I do a rubric on presentation, and one of my dimensions is does it feel like they practiced it, And so I'm sort of hinting ahead of time. You need to practice the presentation before you go into a classroom, and so that is something that I actually use. It appears to have practiced and is very familiar with it, or appears to have come in cold and done it off the cuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And an added piece, thank you, Loretta. And an added piece of this regarding presentations and papers, I often use illustrations of prior works, examples of prior papers. And obviously I change all the identifying information, and I seek permission of the former student if I can. And I had that as examples. I show, oh, this is what excellent work looks like. This is what, same thing. That's also another way to kind of, oh, okay, now I know. I'm not just seeing words, I'm actually seeing. Okay, that's also another piece. Okay. Both the performances or products that seem strikingly excellent, and sometimes those that really need some work as examples. Okay.
We're
range.
kind of, we're about 50 minutes left, and I think we did want to maybe show the Blackboard side of this. Do we wanna-
I could show you an example of how I have brought some of this into my own work.
Can
Okay.
you get the slides? These things? Can you get the
They're
slides?
asking if they can get your slides when you're done. Can we
Yeah,
show them?
I will. Again, just keeping in mind that a lot of this came from. I'm not sure I can point this out to you. I think I mentioned this.
Yes, you did mention that.
Because this right here,
Yeah.
this is a place where you will see a lot of, if not most of what I've been talking about today, and also additional information above and beyond. So you'll have that site to go to.
That'd be great.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. So let me just see if I can get to Blackboard now. I can find it. There are many ways to apply and use rubrics. Blackboard is simply one example. Laurel, you might at some point want to show them that last website that we created. And down here somewhere is the test course. Okay. So this is a course that Laurel helped me to create with some fictitious student data. So I have an assignment that I use through what's called the journal function, and I would go to the grading center, and these are my fictitious students, Barbara Billingsgate, Carl Carlson, and they have submitted their paper online. There are instructions for how to do this that I think SCLD would be able to have for you about how to submit papers, the students' step-by-step instructions for submitting something online. That information is available for you. You can learn that. I'll show you what happens when I get the final products. Okay, so I have a rubric that I've used. So I would go to Barbara Billingsgate, and I would say, I'm going to grade their work so far. So what I do is, here is their paper that they've written, that I've attached. I can open it. So what I usually try to do is I have two screens on which I work, side by side. So I read their paper, I'm reading their paper, and as I read along in their paper, I'm assessing the various criteria, right? So I have their paper, and there's just not enough room on this screen to show you. But over here, I would now go, and I'm going to edit their grade. So I would go, here is my rubric that I would use to assess their work. Okay? These are my criteria. Thoroughness of the topic. Unsatisfactory, poor. Paper is superficial. Low average. Answered some of the question, but not really completely. Above average. Adequate work. Excellent. Addresses topic thoroughly and thoughtfully. So I have these criteria across, and these are the different dimensions. Thoroughness, supporting evidence, integrates theory into paper, writing mechanics, and a sense of their increased knowledge or awareness of the topic, having written about it. And what makes this just really just lovely is as I read through, I go, oh, absolutely. Oh, and I especially liked your references to, you can actually make comments along the way as you theories. Supporting evidence, well, you had 3 or 4 relevant citations. Integrate theory into the your paper, absolutely. Writing mechanics, oh, very polished. You've rewritten this 5 times. Nicely written. Okay, nicely written. Increased awareness, yeah, it's obvious having read your work, you've learned a lot, okay? And then I could give them some more just feedback in general about their work. Enjoyed reading your paper. Enjoyed reading your work. And then I would hit save and submit, and now this is really quite something. I actually now have a grade. There's their grade, just like that. It's a very lovely way to do this, I find.
What would the students see?
Oh, whatever I choose. They could see their score out of, what was it, 20? I forget now.
Yeah.
Out of 20, I could show them that, or I could show them a percentage. However you choose.
No, but what about all the group?
Oh, yes. I don't know how to, you'd have to log into Barbara Billingsgate to be able to look at what they would see.
Okay.
I can do that.
Because right now I think I could log out, right?
Yep.
So I would log out, and Barbara Billingsgate comes along, and she wants to see how she did on her assignment.
I have to guess what the username is, right?
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to
So
remember.
how do you get the rubric? I know when you do an assignment, you can say rubric. Will you just click on that?
This is something that Laurel's going to be able to help you with. How to create them on Blackboard and then attach them to an assignment.
Yeah.
That's a simple step-by-step piece.
You know where the course tools menu is in
Yeah.
Blackboard, in the control panel? One of those options is rubrics.
rubrics, yeah.
So you create the rubric and then you attach it to assignments.
Yeah, because I see when you do
Very
an
doable.
assignment, there's
Create
a
a
rubric
rubric
little thing
in
you
Word or
click.
something like that?
You could create it online.
Online. Okay.
Yeah, on Blackboard. There's actually a way
You
you
can
can
set
create
up all
rubrics.
the
You can set it up.
criteria and everything else.
And I can also capture and print that rubric and have it be available for them to look at, just
Yeah.
as a rubric separate.
Right.
Meaning they can look at the rubric I'll be using.
So this is the student view. Did I get a 90%?
Yeah, you got a 90%. Look at that.
So we have a button on the menu that says check my grades, and when they look, this is what they say, and I can say view rubric, and they get to see the checks.
Look at this. Plus, they can see their feedback. It's all there. Done. And they didn't have to kill a tree.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful? And then final, look, I enjoyed reading your work. This, all the final comments. And I can work through papers so quickly now.
Yeah.
But all the work had to go in on the front end. Creating it, thinking about it, what should be the criteria. Whew! Exciting and a lot of work. But now, it makes it so much more, the process is so much more streamlined now. I can work through it. Okay?
Do you want, I was going to show you a website that I think will be very helpful to you, because I found it challenging to come up with the criteria. I mean, it really, and so I'll share a little secret that when I do mine, I actually get a head start. There's a website called Ruberstar. And this will be also on the slides, a link I think we're
Yeah,
including in the slides.
the link's on there.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, the link is on the, so go to the PowerPoint, right down by the bottom. Back up. There it is.
Huh.
It's on the PowerPoint.
And here's what's kind of nice. Now, I think some of this might have been originally developed for younger grades because they are used extensively in the K-12 environment. In fact, my daughter last weekend spent all weekend on this very major project, and I could hear her, it was a group project, 3 of them worked on it, and I could hear them, rubric in hand, because they all get the rubrics, and they're sort of running out of time, and I could hear them, well, it's 2 points. We'll lose 2 points if we, and they were literally, so they were calculating their grade as they went through. It was a very difficult assignment, invention kind of a thing. But I have found this very helpful. So for example, if I choose writing, it's a good brainstorming place to kind of come to. And I can say research and writing, group planning, let's say a research report or a persuasive essay. We'll go to research report. And you can fill this out because I think this website allows you to save rubrics, and I think they have examples maybe that you can share. And then it gets you started right here, and it's a great place to sort of brainstorm for your own rubrics. And you don't have to keep this one. I just use it to get ideas of what are the criteria. And so mechanics and sources, we talked a lot about that today. And they fill it in right across. And then what I do is I go in and I edit it to sort of fine tune it for myself. But it's a nice site to kind of help you get a push start on in developing a rubric if you're kind of new to it. So I would share that. Again, this is a link that's on that PowerPoint, the very last slide. You just click on the graphic and it will bring it up. But I found this very helpful. And then of course, I could do 2 screens and have my Blackboard rubric next to me, and I could even copy and paste it into that if I wanted to. But I share my rubrics. I didn't use the Blackboard rubrics, but I created tables in Word, and then I put it right into my syllabus. So the last 3 pages of my syllabus are going to be rubric for each project. Rubric, rubric, rubric. And so I share them that way. I did that because when I was teaching it, Blackboard didn't have the rubrics tool yet. If I were to teach now, I would definitely be using this tool because it's more efficient. So.
Super. Anyone have any other questions? I feel like we've given you a lot to think about, hopefully in some concrete tools to move forward in ways that serve you in some particular way. Okay, so Laurel's group can be very helpful around using Blackboard, helping you to create and apply rubrics.
And this is just, they ask how, so here's the course tools and there's the rubrics right here.
Oh yeah, please.
And you go down to rubrics, and there's create rubric. Notice you have import rubrics, so you can move them from course to course as well. So create rubric, and it'll be similar to what we had before. So even this one will give you a little head start in terms of the weight, formatting, allow you to edit it, etc. And you could switch them. So if you like to go 1, 2, 3 versus 3, 2, 1, you can actually reverse the order.
Can you scroll down about 1 inch so I can, folks, so take a look. You can weight different elements however you choose. originality might be not as important as grammar or syntax. So you can choose how you want to weigh the different dimensions.
Anyway, it's just about 2 o'clock.
Mhm.
So, Peter, thank you. I can't tell you. This was very informative. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Very
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
folks. Thank
if
you.
they have a question, can they follow up with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll also know how to get